Welcome back to another episode of the Pax What She Said podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Perri Goldstein, joined not by our usual Maggie Loney this week. Maggie is unfortunately out sick, but I am joined by our very good friend of the show, Andy Herman. If you don't know him, I don't know what year. I think you're living under a rock, but he is the podfather of Pack a Day podcast, in which you can find both Maggie and I on. He has been on the show. You're probably our most featured guest on the show at this point. I think
that
it's
everyone else.
I think I would have to go and count, but I think it's safe to say. Welcome, Andy. Thank you so much for joining us. It's my pleasure to have you, I should say. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be back on. Obviously wish Maggie was here as well, so it would be the three of us, but still excited to talk with you, Perri. I know a lot to still digest from this game. I haven't fully digested it all yet, if I'm being honest. We had sort of the game, then the hangover. We got a slight reprieve from our hangover with a beautiful Vikings destroyed, team by the today, and still kind of breaking things down. We hear from Matt in his press conference, not a ton of takeaways from that, but yeah, still trying to figure out, exactly who this team is, what kind of the key questions are going into the offseason. Wish we were breaking down Packers Lions, but alas, we are not. And it either way is great to be chatting with you.
I know. You said it all. You said it best. It's true. Sometimes these losses take a second, which is, sometimes you want to do that immediate recap.
Yep.
With your reactions, and sometimes you just need a second. And especially when the season ends, this was such a roller coaster of a season. I think a very odd one, as far as my memory serves, comparatively to expectations. Quite frankly, it just panned out very differently than I thought it would. But we're gonna dive into all of it. You started us off with the game, so I think I wanted to start big picture. We've had a day and a half. Wildcard weekend is done. It honestly went as the favorites went for the most part, except for the Rams. There were really not too many surprises. You could maybe say the Commanders were underdogs. You could maybe say the Texans were as well. I know the Chargers were favorites, but for the most part, I felt like this was a pretty status quo weekend. And unfortunately, the Packers were not on the side of an underdog, upsetting the better team. So how are you feeling about this game? Thoughts about this game a day and a half removed, now that the weekend is done, just like overarching?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Before we get there really quick, you mentioned how it kind of feels in this moment and how disappointing the end of the season was, which I don't think there's any getting away from that. It's so funny how these the final thought, right, is the most recent thought, and it's the one that sticks with us the longest. And the lasting impression, and it goes the opposite last year, right? The lasting impression was this team that went on a winning streak at the end and then was right there toe to toe with the San Francisco 49ers in a very entertaining, very tight, very good game. And that's our lasting impression. There was a lot of junk that had happened, especially earlier in that season, that if you look at the season as a whole, I mean, even getting completely nuked by Baker Mayfield at home and, having to fight through tooth and nail to beat the Carolina Panthers on the road, even in that win streak at the end, like there's some crap within that season that we had to swim through, but we had that final lasting impression of like, oh, that's what's going to happen next. Just like that may not happen this year, right? Like we didn't get that immediate progression, just because this is our lasting impression right now of like, oh, that was some not great play from Jordan in those past few games. And there's some injuries that cloud like where this team is going. And I didn't like what I saw from this offense and things like that. It doesn't necessarily mean that that taste is going to linger into 2025 and beyond, and that's going to be what we get. But where I was kind of going with this is prior to this 3-game losing streak, this Packers team, over their 25 games prior to that, were 18-7. 18-7 in that 25-game streak, including wins against Detroit last year on Thanksgiving, including a win against the eventual Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, including a win against Dallas in the playoffs when they were undefeated at home up until that point. Like, and obviously a lot of that was all of that we just talked about was last year, but also again 18-7 in a 25 game stretch for this very young, very talented team. Prior to that 3-game losing streak, you would have looked at that stretch and been like, I'm still very, very excited about where this team is headed, where they're going, who they are, and everything like that. And then you get this unfortunate tough loss against Minnesota on the road. Very tough place to play, tough team. The Bears game barely mattered. It was a throwaway, love is hurt, whatever. And then you have a really bad game against Philly. And that's what we remember. So I know I didn't answer basically your question at all, but that's just kind of spinning through my head of like who this team is. Is it really indicative of just these last 3 games? I think we have to take a longer approach at it, a longer look at it and say, hey, over again, a 30-game period, whatever you want to look at, this team's been pretty darn good and is still trending up in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the healthy thing to do, I think, is to look at this team at the macro level. It's not to look at their performance in the last 3 weeks and say, well, that must be who you are, because we know that that's not the truth, right? So I think that is the correct approach. And I think more fans and just like more people in general, anyone who talks about the NFL should look at that and look at the big picture of this team. It's natural to take the final game, especially a playoff game, because I think that the stakes are different and the way that a team steps up for a playoff game can be very indicative of who that team is, not completely defining by any stretch of the imagination, because we watched them last season go into Dallas, as you said, and do what they did and go toe to toe with San Francisco. So the sample size is there. It's not like this is a repetition, but it was, I think, not surprising because of, again, the track record of the season, especially with the way the offense has gotten off to those slow starts, but just a little bit disappointing to not see them get up for this game.
Yeah.
And again, the Eagles are an incredible team. They have the number 1 defense in the league for a reason. They stifled the Packers offense, and we can talk about all of the reasons why that happened and all of the things that the Packers did wrong. And we can go into those details if we like. We don't have to. I think it was pretty obvious. But we know, and I know, which is what I'm like, again, if I'm answering my own question of like how I'm feeling after this game, is like, I know this team is capable of going toe to toe with any defense. I know that they have, the horses, injuries, unfortunate in this one as well. I know that they have the coach who can scheme up an amazing game plan, and they had the run game that eventually ended up getting going in this game to get back in this one. And they couldn't do it. Like, the game was there for them pretty much the whole time. And so that one was hard for me. Now, as it goes in terms of like heartbreaking losses, no, it doesn't even crack the top 10. It's just it's a simple, disappointing playoff loss, which is fine.
And like, I think the difficult thing in this one as a fan, and I'm sure it had to be as a player, because we talked about Perri, all week long heading into it. Every podcast talked about it. Every written article talked about it. Everywhere is you can't get off to a slow start again, right? That had been their DNA in all of their losses. It followed the same script every single time. They get off to this slow start, they get behind. And so, that the Packers coaches were, trying to get everyone on the right foot and make sure that they're not making mistakes early. And it's drilled into them of, we're going to go out, we're going to start strong. And on the opening kickoff, you have a turnover and a fumble. And that has to be like, especially when it's something that you like, probably the 1A thing that's number 1 on the bulletin board going into the game, take care of the football. Like, we're not going to make mistakes early. And it's almost like, I'm not a golfer, thank God, I wouldn't survive. But like, I've heard that when you go up to a shot thinking, don't slice it, don't slice it, don't slice it, don't slice it, the immediate thing that you do is you slice it, because that's what's just in the back of your mind. You need to have that mindset of like, go hit it solid, go hit it solid, go hit it solid. And it's almost like, don't do a turnover, don't do a turnover, turnover right away. And that had to have been deflating. And then to immediately allow the touchdown. And then like every single time there was like an inkling of like a big play, momentum changer. It was like, oh, Devontae Wyatt's out. Oh, Elton Jenkins is out. Oh, Jaden Reed is out. Oh, Romeo Dobbs is out. You had all of those, not to mention a multitude of other interceptions and bad plays that kind of went against you, of like, every single time you're like, all right, now's the time. Oh, another interception. Oh, now's the time. Oh, there's another interception or an injury. And you just never, ever at any moment could get any sort of real traction. The Josh Jacobs touchdown gave you a little bit of that, and then that was immediately gone pretty much a split second later as well. It's tough, as Matt LaFleur mentioned in his press conference on Tuesday. You cannot go 0-4 in the turnover battle, or -4 in the turnover battle, really in any game, but certainly in a playoff game on the road against the number 2 seed. It's just an impossibility, and that's what really lost them the game.
Yeah. I said it when the fumble happened at the kickoff. I'm like, that's going to define the game. Like that is going to end up defining the whole game. And I knew how the game was going to go from that moment. I did not
Yep.
get to enjoy the game for a single second because of I knew how it would go. And it's unfortunate. It just, I mean, you said it perfectly. It's just every time, missed field goal, right? You finally get a good drive going and you get Brandon McManus, who has been automatic, and he misses from, was it 38? Like,
Yeah,
it
under
just,
40. Yeah.
yeah, just totally. It was not their night. It was
Nope.
absolutely not their night. And there was a point, two things. One I'll say is, like, there was a point where everything just felt hard. Like, who I was watching with, we were just like, everything just feels really hard. And when that's what's happening, no matter, and we can talk about the defense, like, no matter how well the defense played, how much they kept them in it, when you can't get into a rhythm on offense, when you can't get things going, I mean, you can't even, like, put a drive together enough to get into field goal range to make the field goal, you just know you're gonna have a really long day at the office. Um, and then by the end, I'm thinking, I mean, do I even want them to go to Detroit with how many injuries happened in this game? Is that even something that I want when you don't have Christian Watson and you definitely don't have Romeo Dobbs, and now you have no idea what kind of injury Jaden Reed has in his shoulder? It's like, is that something you're going to want to subject this team to, or is it just time to pack this one up and go get healthy and focus on the offseason? So, like I said, just a disappointing end to a season that was really fun and was, I think, by all accounts, and I would love to know how you feel about this, like, a step in the right direction for this team. They won 11 games. They're learning how to win. I think there's a ton of growth that still needs to be had, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I'm really curious to see what this team does in this off season in terms of, like, roster building and construction, and where they put all of their resources to. But I don't want to look at a wild card exit as the only indication of this being like a regression season.
I'm torn. I think there's definitely a multitude of things to point to. Let's go through them.
Yeah.
Youngest team in the league still, back-to-back playoff seasons while being the youngest team in the league. As we mentioned, there's 18-7 streak in there that they played really good football during, including wins against the Chiefs and the Lions, Cowboys in the playoffs, etc. I think they learned some hard lessons. Now they have to learn from them. They have to grow from them. But I think sometimes the adversity, the failure can be a great teacher. We will see next year if Green Bay has actually learned from these mistakes this year. They're going to have plenty of salary cap space to spend and upgrade this roster. They have no real significant free agents that they could lose. We saw what I think is a significant step from this Packers defense. And Jeff Hafley is a dude. He is a legitimate certified dude. And we didn't even get to see his defense, Perri. Like,
Yeah.
we did not get to see a bunch of man-to-man because they didn't have the players on the back end to do it. We did not get to see a lot of just simple four-man rush with playing the way that he wanted to on the back end because his four-man rush could not get there. And I know everyone, when his press conference hit, pointed to, oh, more press man or more, single high safety, more penetration. And we talked about it right after, Perri, of like what stood out to, I think, both of us was the adaptability, the ability to change on the fly, put together a game plan that's going to go against your specific opponent, put your players in positions to be successful. And I don't know how many times, Jeff Hafley has said things like, hey, if we've got a guy that's better standing up, why would I put his hand in the dirt? And if I've got a guy that is better playing in zone, obviously sometimes we're going to have to change it up, but like, why am I going to specifically want that guy to play in man? Like, the fact that he is being willing to alter his defense to make it so that it's best for what he has to work with, and then he did so at such a high level, that is a massive, massive takeaway. And I think you're going to be able to now see Goody go and attack for a second year players that specifically fit this defense, because it's really a lot of the guys that performed well in this defense: Xavier McKinney, Edrin Cooper, Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, right? Those are guys that were brought in specifically for this defense. Everyone else who was kind of like, at times either floundering, staying status quo, or maybe taking a step back, were all guys who were supposed to be sort of 3-4 defense guys that were making that transition. I think they got better as the season went along, and now they're going to have a full year in that system. And now again, you have a whole year of Goody bringing in specific guys like he did this past year for this defense. I think that's going to be a major step. Sean Ryan, Tucker Kraft, to some extent, I think Carrington Valentine, a couple other guys, I think took some pretty good steps this year. Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney were massive, massive free agent signings. Edrin Cooper and Evan Williams look like, Cooper looks like a legitimate, Pro Bowl guy as soon as next year. Evan Williams looks like he's a really good starter in this league. Bullard and Morgan, I would expect to be starters next year. Like, there's a lot of positives still to take away from this. At the same time, I think we can also point to and understand that this league, you have to have really good defense. There's a lot of things that need to go your way. You need to have a good running game. We saw a lot of those things this year, but you need to have a probably really good to great quarterback and a great passing offense in this league if you want to succeed at the highest of levels. And I think, again, when you get this final taste in your mouth over these past even handful of weeks where the passing offense just looks disjointed, it doesn't feel connected, it doesn't feel like they're stacking plays on top of plays. Jordan's not hitting his drop and ripping the ball anywhere near like we saw at the end of last year. And I think we saw a lot of regression from other players on the roster and some very high-paid players like Rashawn Gary and Kenny Clark and Jair Alexander, amongst others, that did not live up to those expectations either. So that's why I'm torn. I think it is very easy to look glass half full. If you want to look at those positives, I think it's very easy to say glass half empty if you want to focus in on the negatives. And I think the truth is, per usual, somewhere in the middle. And that's where I say I'm still at the digestive period of this and kind of going through. There's some things I'm really excited about. There's some things I'm a little nervous about. And now we have kind of the off season to let it either swallow down or regurgitate up. We'll see what ends up happening.
We will. I feel confident in the way that this team bounces back and in the way that this front office is going to build, just because I have yet to see their inability to do that. I agree with you on pretty much everything. But I'll put a pin in the defense for a second and just say, I, for a long time, was of the mindset that I felt like the Packers had enough weapons on offense that at least this season we can see who is going to emerge, who they could lean on. I love the idea of being able to spread the ball around. It looked so good last season. And I have a few thoughts coming out of this season of like, well, that only works if you're hitting on a few things. It only works if everybody's healthy, I think.
Yeah.
Which, like, duh, but also like extra duh when you don't have that like ace, up your sleeve. 2, it only works if your guys are winning. Like last year, you saw these guys winning most of the time. And this year you saw what it looks like when they're not. And when they're not is when we see that disjointed, non-rhythmic offense. It also only works like when you surprise defenses. And I think last season was a surprise because there was no tape on this team. And this year, there's a ton of tape on this team. And you would be surprised, especially not surprised, actually, I should say, when you go up against the good teams, as they did, and the good coordinators, at how much they scout a good offense. And when you have a good game plan against a good offense, you're going to be able to stop them. And I feel like that's what we saw with the Packers offense this season. So they're going to need to adapt next season and evolve as other teams have done in stopping them. I pushed back a lot on the Packers need a wide receiver one thing, right? And I don't want to say, oh, they need to go out and get, X person. That's not where I'm at, but they need someone who wins consistently. That's still like, and again, you can say, well, yeah, duh, but like not duh, like there was no one that I could point to on this on this roster who wins consistently. Quite frankly, like your running back, yes, it was amazing to watch Josh Jacobs be the linchpin of this offense, but you need a wide receiver who is also that person. And the next person that I can think of who wins consistently was Tucker Kraft. And he was just not featured enough in the passing game. He's too important in other things, and he needs to stay important and do all those other things that he needs to do in the blocking game, etc. Especially when an offensive lineman goes down and you need to retool your entire, game plan with extra blocking scheme, and you remove that one guy who can catch the ball and make, yards after the catch. Who else is there? It needs to be your wide receivers. It just needs to be. And I love Christian Watson. But he's not going to be available for like at least the first half of the 2025 season. So they're going to have to do something in that room. And I think it's unfortunate that one of those guys just didn't step up to become like that dude this season.
Yeah, and I'm with you in every aspect there. And what I'll say too is when it comes to, like you said, like they need to be healthy, right? Like if I think if like even a couple of these guys took even a small step forward this season, if Christian Watson was out and you got really good Dontavian Wicks and really good Jaden Reed and solid Romeo Dobbs and Bo Melton and Malik Heath, like going into the season, I would have been like, that's more than good enough. But on the whole, not only did nobody take a step forward, most took a step backwards. It just wasn't as good this year. And again, I think to Matt's point, that's everyone on offense. That's him. That's the offense. That's the play calling. That's the route running. That's the blocking. That's the quarterback. That's everyone. Everyone needs to be better, but nobody took a step up. And now you don't feel the same when there is a guy missing, or like you just feel like you're lacking at that position. And I'm with you in the fact that I fought back vehemently in the offseason. In fact, I said Green Bay looks like they are the envy of the rest of the league. And the fact that you've got a really young, super talented wide receiver core that you're paying like a total of $6 million to. I mean, that is like the best possible scenario. But then you get another injury riddled Christian Watson season. Dobbs was down at times. Nobody takes a step forward. Multiple guys take a step backward. And you get to the end of this year and you're like, well, wow, that really evolved into something or devolved into something I was not expecting it to. And then it takes you to, evolve your thought process on it and say, yeah, especially with Christian Watson, like you said, being out a good chunk of the season, Romeo Dobbs just had 2 back-to-back really bad head injuries is what it looked like. And you add on the top of that Dobbs and Watson are free agents the following season. Wicks, Reed, Melton, Heath did not take a step forward. You're at the point already with Heath and Melton where you're probably not making roster decisions based on those two. They're just kind of like nice to haves or whatever, but you're not making any draft or top of the wide receiver decisions based on those guys being on the roster. So it changes the calculus quite a bit. And you do all of a sudden, if like, let's just say, slot in a tier 1-ish wide receiver into that room. And all of a sudden you kind of move a Romeo Dobbs to number 2, Jaden Reed is your slot guy, Wicks to 4, maybe a Melton. And obviously I'm assuming like Watson's out here for a while, but like, and like
You're
everything sort of solidifies, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I want to ask you about Jordan. I want to talk about Jordan because I'm team Jordan, right?
Yep.
I think we all understand Jordan. And again, I think progress in this league is linear. We saw a huge regression year from CJ Stroud. We see ups and downs from guys all the time, elite guys. So I am in no camp of saying, I'm of anything supremely negative about Jordan, quite frankly. I think he unfortunately didn't have a one game that I can like think of off the top of my head that really like stands out to me this season of like the Lions game last year, right? Or the Cowboys game. But we know he's capable, okay? And my only thing that I'm concerned about or I have questions about is the clutch gene. And so this is my question for you is, are we concerned? Because this is I think what separates the really good franchise quarterbacks from the greats.
Sure.
It's the Aaron Rodgers and the Patrick Mahomeses, and we're seeing Jaden Daniels this season lead
Yep.
fourth quarter comebacks, right? Is Jordan capable of leading game winning and or comeback drives? And that is where that is the only piece of his game currently for me that I'm like, I haven't seen it. In those moments, he makes mistakes. Whether it's him, whether it's the offense, whether it's the guys around him, it's probably a combination. But if you really believe that this guy is your guy, he should have a little bit of Superman in him and be able to make a play. And I didn't see it this season. So where are you with the clutch gene?
Yeah, obviously the 49ers game at the end of last year was a huge opportunity that was not capitalized on. You ended with a huge interception. The Philadelphia game this year, he kind of gets, on that final drive. Again, it would have been a really tough situation in that one anyway, but he immediately gets injured in that one. The Vikings game, they go down 28-0. I thought he was pretty freaking incredible in that game to lead a pretty impressive charge back that got them within, 2 points. They from that point forward, they outscored Minnesota 29-3 the remainder of that game. It's just unfortunate that they got off to that 28-0 start. Obviously did have the interception late in that game, which definitely cost them, but definitely rallied and made a pretty impressive comeback attempt. The game against Detroit was never really close and didn't really have the opportunity to kind of lead that comeback. The next game against Detroit in Detroit, in the fourth quarter, he leads. I think they had some favorable field position, if I remember correctly, but leads a touchdown drive to begin the fourth quarter to go up by 4. Detroit goes right back down, scores a touchdown. Jordan leads a drive right back to get a field goal to tie the game, and then Detroit just runs out the clock and gets a game-winning field goal after that. So he doesn't have the opportunity to have that rebuttal. And then the next Minnesota game again wasn't particularly close. Unfortunately, it was they lost by 2, but they kind of closed that gap a little bit at the end. And then Chicago, he's out injured for, and again, this one didn't really have the opportunity to put any sort of game-winning drive together. Now, to your point, in big games, you're hoping that he just shows up huge to the beginning of it and doesn't have to lead sort of a comeback. And that is like clutch isn't just the fourth quarter. Clutch is showing up big in big games. To your point here,
that's more of what I mean.
Yes. So I do think that it needs to be better in big games. I do think a victory over KC, Detroit last year on Thanksgiving, Dallas in the playoffs is at minimum some proof of concept that all right, he's shown it to some extent. The Panthers game against a very bad team, again, he put together a really strong end of that game to go on and win that game. I think there's enough there. I'm less concerned about a quote unquote clutch gene and the big game sort of scenario as I am just the overall consistency. I don't necessarily think it's a big game, non-big game. I think just better teams have given him a little bit more trouble. And in those games, it's the attention to detail, it's the accuracy, it's the footwork, it's the perfection of the position that's going to put you over the top against teams that are really, really good, where you have to go either toe to toe with a unbelievable offense on the other side, which means you're going to have to put up high 30s or 30-point performances on offense, or you're going up against one of the league's best defenses, or some combination of both. And that's where Jordan just needs to be, I think, a bit more consistent overall. To Matt's point, I think that's everyone on offense. I don't think it's just a Jordan thing, but attention to detail is really what I came away from Matt's press conference on Tuesday thinking that's their next step. I think the talent is there. I think the players are there. I think the staff, the scheme, the foundation is there. But if this team wants to go from good to great, it's attention to detail from everybody. And if they get there, it's going to be special. If they don't, we're probably looking at another team that can beat a lot of bad teams and struggles against some really good teams.
So for you, this is fixable.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's fixable from Jordan. I think it's fixable from the players that are around him as well. I just think it has to be more consistent overall. But I guess my other point to this is it's not necessarily a clutch, non-clutch thing as much as it is I do have some concerns with just the overall consistency on a down to down and game to game basis. We've seen Jordan get hot at times and go on these stretches where he looks unbelievable. But in the aggregate, we also see some, kind of high highs, low lows, some middling, and you just kind of don't know which Jordan Love is going to kind of show up week to week. And I'll add on top of that, I don't know how much of that has had to do with this season being a weird season, because you get MCL and then a bunch of games where he's clearly favoring the MCL. You get the groin and clearly a handful of games where he's still favoring the groin. You get an elbow injury in this game. That could be the entire story of the season. It literally, and not having practice time while dealing with those injuries, that could literally be all of it. That's why I think now those questions are out there, and 2025 is going to be a huge season for Jordan to kind of define this for us.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think 2025 will be interesting, simply because, I mean, again, if we get a full healthy season, it will be a little bit more defining. Because I think a young guy, he's still a young guy, right? This is year 2 of being a full-time starter. Like, you need those practice reps. You're not a vet. You're not Aaron Rodgers. You can't, miss practice the whole week and still go out in the game and be magical. Though every rep with your wide receivers, with everyone, is a building block to something. So I agree with you. Okay, interesting. All right, that was my little hot takey moment. Just
I love
curious. All right, just let's quickly touch on the defense. I know you did already, but I feel like this defense arrow is pointing up just over the course of the season, given the injuries and who Jeff Hafley has been missing all season, the fact that they pretty much did not have a pass rush all year. I still thought the way that they played in this game, but like over the course of the second half of the season, just like really keeping their offense in games. Big moments are still, again, the key here. Like, can you make that stop on third down when you need it? But overall, I mean, especially in this Eagles game, like, this is a very, very good Eagles offense, and they did everything, absolutely everything possible to give their offense a chance to come back. So I feel arrow pointing up. I think there's a lot of budding stars. I think you and I, over the last couple of years, have talked a lot about the need for playmakers on this team, especially on that side of the ball. And I'm starting to really be able to pick up who those guys are. Xavier McKinney, Edgerrin Cooper. I think Evan Williams can be someone. I think Javon Bullard can develop into someone. But again, you need your full plethora of a secondary to really see who Jeff Hafley can be. And so I think 2025 hopefully will be the year, depending on what they do this offseason.
I agree, yes, but like I kind of feel like I've already seen what Jeff Hafley can be. I mean, the range of improvement that this defense showed. These are Zach Cruz posted these. He's done a great job recapping a bunch of stuff already in these past few days. First season under Jeff Hafley, points per game allowed went from 10th to 6th, yards per play 20th to 5th, DVOA 27th to 7th, EPA per play 24th to 4th, yards per game allowed 17th to 5th, takeaways 23rd to 4th, yards per carry allowed 22nd to 3rd, passer rating allowed 25th to 9th, tackles for loss 22nd to 5th. Every one of those categories, a top 10. And in fact, almost all of them, a top 7, other than passer rating allowed. Takeaways, 4th. Yards per carry, 3rd. Passer rating, 9th. Tackles for loss, 5th. Points per game, 6th. Yards per play, 5th. DVOA, 7th. EPA per play, 4th. And yards per game, 5th. Like, that is a legitimate, bona fide top 5, arguably, if you want to say 6, 7, 8, whatever, that's fine. But that is a top performing defense without a legitimate big time pass rush, without Jair Alexander a huge chunk of the year, without anything resembling a number 1 corner out there. And he still put it together to be this style of defense. And to your point, Perri, go out in a game against the Philadelphia Eagles, against Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, AJ Brown, the best offensive line in football, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and hang in that game despite 4 turnovers from your offense and special teams, consistently being put in poor positions, and still giving the Packers a puncher's chance into the 4th quarter in that game, which they had no right to have. I don't even like, this is the floor now to me for what they can potentially become. And it's a top 10 defense, which is insane to say for a Green Bay Packers team that's been struggling with defense for, it feels like, decades. And I could not be more excited about what he was able to accomplish in year one.
When you put those numbers in, I'm like, they were a top 10 defense. It's hard.
Easily.
It's hard to wrap your brain around, but that's what I mean by, like, I can't wait to see what he does. Like, imagine giving him a number one corner. Imagine giving him a pass rush. Like, imagine where this defense can go based on what he was able to do this season. It's very exciting. So I think if anyone listening is still really down about the game and the exit and the season ending, like, this is your, like, big positive takeaway. I think there's nothing really, like, negative you can take away from the defense this season. It's all good and it's all arrow up.
It's hard. I get it, because defense is inherently a negative viewing experience. Like, yes, you get interceptions from time to time or whatever, and like you have some good games, but inherently defense it's going to be frustrating. Like, it's not like basketball where maybe you can turn a steal immediately into a basket. I guess you can get a pick six or whatever, but like it's really hard because you're constantly getting beat. Like, the opposing team pretty much going into any game is pretty much guaranteed just about right around 20 points and 300 some yards. I get there's exceptions to that, but like, you're going to have to deal with your guys giving up usually 2 to 3 touchdowns, a couple big drives, and 300 plus yards against you through the course of the game, to everyone, every single game. So there's going to be frustration that goes into that, which makes you really have to kind of peel back and say, all right, what's the expectation? What is going to happen almost no matter what? It's like in baseball where you say, you start with 40 wins and in 40 losses, and it's the other ones that kind of make it up, or 30 wins, 30 losses, 20 wins, whatever it is. They're like, everyone gets the same amount. You're going to give up a certain amount of points and you're going to get a certain amount of turnovers almost no matter what. Now it's what you do in the middle of it. And for the overall, what Jeff Hafley did, I get the viewing experience sometimes in the moment can be frustrating. Just know that on the whole, on the aggregate, when you're looking at it against all other teams, unbelievable performance from Jeff Hafley this year.
Yeah, truly exceeded expectations. I think if anything this season exceeded expectations, it was him. Okay, quick. Are we disappointed in this loss? Where do we stand on the disappointment?
Yeah, I'm disappointed in the loss for a variety of reasons. I think, one, the fact that they could not get themselves out of the rut offensively, despite seeing some signs of this really going into the playoffs, that there were some things that were broken, and just not able to fix it is disappointing. I think the other thing is, if they had a signature win or two during the course of the season, again, and to give us a little bit more proof that they can go and beat big teams, I would say, like, all right, this loss in and of itself, maybe not the most brutal, but you kept getting opportunities against the line. I mean, 6 opportunities against the Lions, the Vikings, and the Eagles, and you couldn't pull off one of them. That's disappointing. And then the fact that all 6 of those losses really followed almost the exact same script every single time, and you couldn't learn from the mistakes prior, that is absolutely disappointing. And then again, the fact that you were a team that won a playoff game a season ago, you really made some significant additions to your team, and Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney, Adrian Cooper, Evan Williams, etc. And it felt still like at the end, even though I get technically you won more games this year, it felt like a little bit of a step back. That to me is a level of disappointing as well. So to your point, it's not always linear. There's going to be sometimes one step back to take 2 steps forward. I'm hoping that's what this is, but I will put this firmly in a disappointing loss to Philly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's disappointing about it is the way it happened. I think that if the Packers had, like, gone toe to toe and they got up and it was a shootout and it was just like, and it was whatever it was, and they just happened to lose on a field goal or, whatever, I'd be like, well, okay, they looked great. But
Yep.
it was the same, to your point, script as every other loss this year. And when it's this, you're watching the same thing consistently happen and you're saying to yourself, why does this keep happening? We know that, like, I knew if they're going to lose, I know exactly how I'm going to watch them lose. It's insanity. And it must be, I mean, supremely frustrating for them too, to know what their weaknesses are and what their issues are and not be able to fix them. But it was a season of just not being able to fix the issues that plagued them from week 1 through week 18 through the wild card weekend. So I hope they find some answers this offseason. Because I mean, they can't keep they can't keep doing this.
Let's hope not.
I felt actually more confident going into the Eagles. I really felt like they had a chance going into the
For
Eagles
sure.
game. I just think like if you want to do the on paper, like they're evenly matched, and the Packers easily could have upset that team if they played their best football, and they didn't. And I think that's just the story of every big matchup this season is they could have easily beaten the Lions. They could have easily beaten the Vikings, and we saw them almost do it, but just shoot themselves in the foot. So I agree with you in disappointing for different reasons than previous losses. I think also, again, like expectations versus realities of the season was expectations were really high this season. And the reality ended up being that they didn't go as far, right? So how do we grapple with that, and what does that look like? And every season is different, so it's hard to do a direct comparison by any
Yep.
means. But if you want to do the window thing, there's a window here, and they got to start to outperform themselves each season to capitalize on that. So with that, where do they go from here? Because we're now in the off season, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I wish we weren't, but we are. So where do they go now, Andy Herman?
Cancun. I'm just kidding.
Disneyland.
No, Disneyland's for winners, Perry. You got to go to.
No, Disney World is for winners. No,
That's true. That's true. No, I think you're going to see Goody go out and spend. I would expect a similar offseason to last year in which you get an impact player on offense and you get an impact player on defense. Don't know what position for sure. My guess is maybe a wide receiver on offense or maybe an offensive lineman. My guess is a defensive lineman, either end or tackle or maybe a corner. Could you do a defensive tackle in a corner, or a tackle in an end, or some things like that? Sure. But I think it's probably more likely one on offense, one on defense, and then maybe a couple, Andre Dillard-esque signings, just some veteran help here and there where you maybe need a guy. And then I would expect them to probably go. To me, like, I think there's a fairly easy, and again, they're going to let the board hit the way that it is. But the way that I would see the draft going is, I think in the first 3 rounds, you're going to see a pass rusher, a corner, and a wide receiver in some capacity. And then I think you're going to see 3 offensive linemen taken, but I think it could be like 4th, 5th, 7th round, something like that. And then, some BPA stuff along the way as well. But I think you'll see a corner taken early, pass rusher taken early, and a wide receiver taken early. And then, like I said, multiple offensive linemen. And you really don't need a safety. You can kind of take a linebacker late, but you've got really Hopper, Cooper, and Walker that are going to be kind of probably your primary 3 going into next year. You need probably a pass rusher along the line, but you don't need like 3-4 guys. You have good depth there. You just need kind of an alpha or somebody that can do a little bit more there. And then again, offensive line, you have theoretically a starting 5, but need some more competition, need some more depth. Wide receiver, you probably need a guy. Running back, you're set. Quarterback, you're set. Safety, you're set. So there's not like other positions, but I think it kind of plays out well for where their needs are. And like I said, impact guy in offense, impact guy in defense, early corner, early wide receiver, early defensive pass rusher. Like that, you feel pretty good going into next season attacking those positions.
Yeah. All right, you heard it here, folks. Put your money on the draft. Sounds
There
like
you
a
go.
pretty Packersy draft to me.
Very much so.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think this season, Goot did one thing that we all hoped and expected he would do, and one thing that we didn't expect him to do. The former being Xavier McKinney and the latter being Josh Jacobs. So I'm curious to see where he goes with this season. The Packers certainly have the cap space, which is a really nice thing. They did the Band-Aid with Rodgers, and it was really tough for the time. And now they're in that like really sweet home stretch spot. And they don't have any free agents that they feel like they have to bring back. The Packers usually prioritize their own, right? And I think this is going to be a season where they don't really need to do that, which is also going to be a change for them. So they can really hone in on some of these positions of need. This is a conversation for a totally another episode, and you did an episode on this already, but there are going to be some guys who are currently on the roster, bigger names who are not free agents, who may not be on the roster next season that are ones to watch for sure. I will not put the names out into the universe because it makes me sad, quite frankly.
I think everyone knows that main name.
Okay, whatever. I'm being coy. I don't have his jersey. I don't wear it to every game.
You always get this is a pro tip for everyone out at home. When you go get a jersey, go get a favorite player from years past. Go get a Charles Woodson jersey, a Nick Collins jersey.
Okay, he got his big contract. I thought it was safe.
I understand. I'm just saying, like, this is why. And you always feel a little bit more comfortable. Go get a Tremont Williams jersey. Go get in, whomever. Go get a Sam Congato jersey. I don't care who it is, but like, go get players of yore, so that those jerseys never go out of style. They're always going to be classy, and then you never have to worry about said player getting traded at some point in the season or released or whatever.
It's such good advice. It's such good advice. With that said player may not be on the roster. If you haven't, go listen to Andy's episode about it. But
I can't believe you're that upset about Tyler Davis. First of all, I can't believe you bought a Tyler Davis jersey. But
I'm devastated. That being said, right, lots of things to watch. I think not just in free agency, but within the building, what they do with some of these pieces that are currently there. So we're in off-season mode now. Any final thoughts, Andy, for us?
No, I think it's another really interesting offseason. It doesn't have quite the 5 picks in the first 3 rounds sort of feel to it. They didn't trade away Devontae or Aaron Rodgers in the past season to get those, all those extra picks. You're not going to get a bunch of comp picks or anything like that. So it's going to have a very normal draft feel to it. Although it is, of course, in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is going to make it much more fun. And then I do think the free agency is going to be the big one. So when you look at the, kind of defining moments for Goody this offseason and really this team, don't expect a ton of major coaching changes. We already heard about Tom Clements. There's going to be a new quarterbacks coach, but my guess is that somebody that's already in the building, or Luke Getsy, who's been in the building at Jace and has been the former quarterbacks coach in the past. Don't think there's going to be a ton of other moves. Don't think you're going to see any scheme changes or anything like that. Don't think, again, it's going to be this epic draft where you've got 5 picks in the first 100 or anything like that. So I think where this team really has to make, really the improvements, clearly still through the draft. They're a draft and develop team by heart. The money that they're going to go out and spend in free agency, like I said, I think they're going to get, 2 or 3, impact type of players in this free agency period. I think that's going to be important. And then I think it's really also going to be the OTAs, the mini camps, the training camps, because this is still the youngest team in the league that has a ton of talent on it, that is very young. And it's going to be important for those players to take a positive step in the right direction. Quite frankly, we didn't see enough of that in 2024. It needs to happen better in 2025. So those coaches that are remaining, they got to make their money really developing these players this year and getting them to a point, because 2025 does feel like a very important season for this Packers team.
Totally. And to your point about the decisions they're going to make, and this is, I think, my final thought, is it's a good thing that the Packers are making these smaller decisions, that they're building off of the season, that they're honing in. Teams who have to make big decisions, who get the big picks, who have the scheme changes, the coordinator changes, those are teams in bad positions.
Yep.
So the Packers are, despite how disappointed we are at the way the season ended, despite the fact that they did not go as far or did not reach as high as one would have liked, are in a very good position to again succeed next season. And so for that, we are grateful. And on to the offseason. Andy, thank you so much. It is always such a pleasure talking about football with you. If people don't know where to find you, which would be wild, please tell everyone how to find all of your wonderful work, because I feel like you are everywhere.
You can find me right on that Twitter handle above at Maggie J. Loney. And you can find me at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast 365 days a year, wherever you get your favorite podcast. You can find me on the Pack-A-Day radio show on 1250 AM and 1057 FM, The Fan in Milwaukee, and probably way too many other places. Bleacher Report, 3 p.m. to 3:30 Central, Monday through Thursday, doing a live chat there. So yeah, like I said, probably too much Andy, but we're about to find out just how saturated the world can get with my Packer takes. It's we're reaching saturation point.
Love it. And now Pax What She Said.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you all for listening. You can find me at Perri_Goldstein. You can follow the podcast at PWSS Podcast. Pax What She Said on every social platform, YouTube, subscribe. If you like what we're doing, you can subscribe to us on Spotify if that is where you listen. We love that. Thank you to everyone who has already done that. So thank you again. It's been a wonderful season. We will continue with off-season content as we do every year. And Maggie will be back shortly. And as always, go Pack Go.